What is an index fund?
What is an ETF?
Should I invest in crypto or is it too risky?
How to actually take the first step and invest your money?
How do I do research on stocks?
What is the difference between saving and investing?
Investing can feel overwhelming, especially for students who are just getting started, but it doesn't have to be. I'm Dr. Lee.
And I'm Emilia Kospchak. We know that getting into investing comes with a lot of uncertainty, and no question is out of bounds. That's why we gathered the most common questions from students and answered them on the spot, breaking down everything from building your first portfolio to understanding stocks, ETFs, and TFSAs. No complicated jargon, just clear, practical advice to help you invest with confidence. Whether you're looking to grow your savings, navigate market trends, or avoid common beginner mistakes, you're in the right place. Ready to take the first step towards financial freedom? Let's get started.
I'm Dr. Lee.
And I'm Emilia.
And welcome to the Enriched Mindset Podcast. On this episode on investing for students, we're bringing you the no BS guide to money, investing, and adulting.
As psych majors, we often learn about attachments, cognitive distortions, and personality, but often manage to forget the one thing that causes most people stress: money.
Whether you're trying to save for travel, max out your TFSA, or just stop blowing your paycheck on Starbucks, we got you. Let's get into it. Emilia, I'm really excited about this podcast. What about you?
Me too. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it. Investing is such a fun and exciting topic. It's something that really, I think, connects us together. So let's talk about it. Maybe you can start actually with your story about investing.
Yeah, like how I got into it. Yeah, for sure. So I think my story is a little bit atypical, not really your average story, not to put myself out there like that. But I actually started when I was still in high school, back when I was in grade 10. It was peak COVID. I actually came across investing first in one of my business classes that I took, but it wasn't really explained in a way that I thought was actually helpful. And I was a little bit confused by it, the way that my teacher explained it. But she pretty much set us up to enter like this friendly competition with our classmates, where she set up accounts on the practice account, sort of like they have on like Webull, Investopedia, stuff like that, Questrade. They have the practice accounts where you get a fake amount of money. I think we got $100,000, and it tracked like the real market. So we had to put in our investments and pretty much see who would make the most amount of money. But she never really talked about that this is an actual way to make money in real life through a TFSA. I just sort of viewed it as more of a game. Like at that time, peak COVID hit and I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I decided to sort of start learning how to invest. This was back when I was still 15, 16. So I couldn't actually, open my own TFSA because you have to be 18.
Yep.
So I started sending my dad money that I would earn on the side and asked him to invest in his TFSA on my behalf. So I would just ask him like what to invest in, and then he would do that for me. So that's sort of how I got into it. Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing. Most people don't even know what a TFSA is. We've learned that through our interviews, even business students.
Yeah.
The fact that you were doing this early is just amazing. I grew up, I'm a second generation Canadian. My parents came here. All they talked about was saving money, but I never learned about investing. I think when they invested as well, they probably invested in things that were safe early on. And I think that's a kind of a common story, is people just learning to live frugally, saving money, but not necessarily knowing how to make their money grow. So when I went to grad school, we were actually discouraged from talking about business, about finance. So I think most of my colleagues were pretty unprepared. We're just focusing on learning clinical skills. When we get our first jobs, we're just excited to work and we're just trying to make ends meet. And that's essentially what happened with me early in my career. I didn't have the money left over to invest.
Right.
Most I saved in a year was $5,000. But as my career grew, I started to make enough money where I wasn't spending it all. So I needed to figure out what to do with it. And so I had an accountant. And obviously my accountant knows how much I'm making. She referred me to this major bank where they had a group where they specialized in mostly physicians. They got a hold of me. They invited me to these golf courses. They paid for dinner, had these like presentations. They treat you like gold. They treat me so well. And I think I got hooked into that.
Right.
They made me feel really special.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, guys, help me invest. And I gave them my money. And the weird thing is I never really knew how these guys were getting paid,
Right.
right? They just never brought it up. And one day I asked them by email, and they kind of danced around it. I asked again and again, and the fifth time I CC'd my accountant, and they finally told me that they were making 2.5% of my entire portfolio every year, whether or not the market was going up or down. And I also had done a deep dive on the things that they invested in. They invested in mostly mutual funds that had high management fees, and they had these commissions. So they're making a lot of money for themselves, essentially. I decided to fire them. And I got a nasty, nasty reply from the investment advisor. It was a sign, you know?
Yeah.
I think he felt really threatened.
Good.
But I had a dilemma. I basically liquidated all the things that they were in, and I was sitting in cash. Now, as you know, if you're sitting in cash, you're actually losing money because of inflation. And I had to quickly figure out what I'm going to do. To kind of make a long story short, I had to learn on my own. I kind of utilized what I learned in grad school on trying to find what the evidence tells us. And that kind of guided me to strategies that weren't trying to beat the market, because the data shows that most people cannot do this consistently, even the most brilliant people, because the markets are so efficient. So I learned about these things called exchange traded funds, ETFs, and this community of people that were into financial independence, just normal people, not like finance majors, but they figured out this secret on gaining financial independence without having to rely on advisors. Often make everything seem so complicated, and actually things are much simpler. And I think that's going to be one of our messages, is that anyone can learn this, anyone can implement this. It's not as intimidating, but you're going to have to do a little bit of work. I started to figure out how to invest on my own. And I think as we go through the podcast, we can talk about how that happened. But yeah, that's kind of my story. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. Over here, we have some questions that I asked some of our interns to prepare for us. So why don't we just dive in?
Awesome. This is really interesting, because our intern team is psychology majors, and some of them invest, and some of them, frankly, have no idea. So I think these are their raw questions, and it'll just be interesting to kind of go through them. So, okay, let's dive in.
Do you want to go ahead?
Right. Okay,
Go ahead.
All right. Get in here. All righty. So I got here, what is an index fund? You want to try giving that a stab?
Sure, yeah. So an index fund is pretty much something that tracks the market, and there can be different sectors of an index fund. So for example, an index example is NASDAQ or the S&P 500, which tracks the top 500 performing American companies. And when you invest in an index, you're pretty much investing in that one sector across all of those different companies.
I think there's many kinds of indexes mentioned. We have obviously like the TSX in Toronto. That's mostly the Canadian companies. An index fund is something that is a really wise kind of investment, usually highly diversified. And can you give some examples of actual ETFs that track indexes?
Yeah, so for example, like VOO, I think tracks
S&P 500.
VFV, VSP, QQQ, SPY.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so can we talk about that, like these tickers? Usually 3 letters, typically, right? And sometimes they get really cute. Like the S&P 500, again, is the top 500 companies, generally speaking, in the United States. And VOO, V is a Roman numeral for 5, right? So 500. VSP, right? S&P. And V stands for, V is really like Vanguard. This is the company. So there are these companies that specialize in creating these index funds, and Vanguard is one of the trailblazers for this. Why don't you pick one?
Sure. Okay. What is an ETF?
ETF. Okay, yeah. So we kind of talked about that related to index funds.
Yeah.
So it's an exchange traded fund. So it's actually traded on the open market. You can buy and sell it during the trading hours, Monday to Friday from 9:30 to 4:30.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
And it typically tracks an index, typically. So There can be very specific ETFs, for example, ones that track the banking sector. Like you mentioned QQQ, so that's the technology companies listed on the NASDAQ. That's an ETF. One of the things that make this an ETF really appealing is usually they have very small management fees. When you buy a stock, an individual stock, there is no management fee per se, but one of the main things that you want to do is diversify your portfolio. If you wanted to do that, you'd have to buy hundreds, if not thousands of stocks, which is extremely complicated and can be very costly. Or you can get an exchange traded fund that tracks an index, and in some cases you're getting like 10,000 stocks. So there is going to be a fee for that, but usually it's some kind of computer that's doing this for you, and the management fee is like extremely small. So you're getting the benefit of diversification for a very tiny fee. And you don't need to pay an advisor to do this for you.
Yeah.
You know, let's talk about stocks then. What's a stock?
Sure. So a stock is just like an individual company that you're buying a share of that company. So for example, you can buy a share of Apple or Amazon, like any major company that's on sort of the stock exchange you can purchase. Typically stocks are more expensive than ETFs. ETFs are usually a little bit cheaper. For example, VSP, VOO, usually in the couple $100s. So I think with an ETF, that's definitely an advantage. It's a lower cost and you get fractions of several different of these individual stocks when you're just buying the one thing. Whereas with the stock, if you want to get a lot of them, then you have to put in a trade for every single stock.
I think with the stocks, like you mentioned, an ETF is more expensive than a stock. Is that what you said? Oh, less expensive? Yeah. I think it really depends on the stock though, right? Because you can have you have penny stocks,
penny
right?
Stocks, yeah.
It's kind of weird, like some ETFs that track the same index, the prices of them are the same. Or sorry, they're different. Yeah. But I think this is one of the things, like when you start trading, you start to get more experience on like what stocks cost. The actual cost of the price of a stock, that's an interesting thing too, because you can have some stocks that have been growing so much that now they're over $1,000. You heard of Berkshire Hathaway stock?
Yeah, that's a couple $100,000.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And then they created another version of their stock that was much more affordable for people. But again, typically speaking, ETFs will not be like a crazy amount. All right, so let's go to the next question. Well, should I invest in crypto or is it too risky?
Yeah, I think it's risky. That's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about crypto is it's not really backed by anything substantial. The worth of it is what kind of everyone agrees it is.
Yeah.
And so it is highly risky. And in some sense, like if you had the foresight to buy it several years ago, or then it was a great investment because it's grown quite a lot. Nowadays, though, it is quite volatile and you have to be prepared for it to go to zero. So I think it depends on your personality as well. If you're going to get a lot of FOMO from not investing in something like this, when your friends have invested in it and now they have a ton of money, then maybe this is the thing for you. But I would never put all your eggs in one basket and go too hard on that. Yeah. I don't invest in crypto. Do you?
Me neither. No. Yeah. I think just going back to that diversification aspect, maybe we can define that for the audience. It's pretty much just making sure that you're buying into different sectors. So for example, you're not putting all of your money into tech or into healthcare, because if one of those industries goes down, then so does your money, right? So I think with crypto, if you put all of your money in it and it's something that's really volatile, meaning that it changes a lot and it can have the possibility to go to zero in one day, then you definitely don't want to be investing in that.
And I think one of the interesting things about investing is how emotions are involved. I think the two biggest ones are like fear and greed. Those are the two major drivers. And learning how to manage these emotions is so critical. There was an interesting study that showed that the most effective investors were people who were dead. So like their investment portfolios continued, but the people died and they didn't they stopped touching, buying and selling and all that stuff. So basically when you remove the human element, things were better. That's because like when things start dropping, people panic. So right now, and the market is volatile, the indexes are falling, and people are more prone to invest in safer things like GICs. Obviously, in this podcast, we're not giving people financial advice per se, but sometimes with investing, you have to go against your emotional instincts. Would you agree with that?
No, I totally agree. I think there are lots of studies, obviously, on the emotional aspect, but also on how personality ties into what investments someone is more likely to make. So, for example, I read this really interesting study about how people who are higher in extroversion and higher in openness to experience on the big five, they're more likely to invest in more dangerous things like crypto and just experiment more with their money. And that potentially led them to have lower gains on their portfolio. Whereas those with lower openness to experience, a little bit more reserved, higher neuroticism, those type of traits were more likely to actually put their money into something safer like ETFs and actually gain more over time. So I thought that was super interesting and really relevant too.
It's really interesting because when it comes to investing, a lot of it is psychological. And I think financial advisors are starting to learn that this is actually more important than the investment products. We're going to the Financial Therapy Association conference in a few months, and they really get it, obviously. They know how important mindset is, behavior to outcomes. So you have all these financial advisors that are wanting to learn about the psychological aspects of money and people's relationship to money, like exactly personality style. I believe someone's going to talk about that at the conference as well. So there's many angles to take, and I think mastering your emotional regulation can help you become really successful.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so I'm going to open up another one here. Okay, how do I build an emergency fund and how much should be in it?
It's a great question.
Let's just talk about what an emergency fund is. You ever heard of Dave Ramsey, by the way?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so he's got these baby steps. The first one is to save $1,000 as an initial emergency fund. Now that $1,000, that amount, I don't think it's changed in over a decade. It's not really about the dollar figure, but it's just the behavioral step of being able to tell yourself you can save $1,000.
Yeah.
It's just something small. $1,000 is not going to save you initially, but I think that's his first step. Then the actual emergency fund that he wants people to develop is 3 to 6 months of living expenses, right? So why is this important?
Well, I think the stats show that 3 months is sort of the ballpark because that's the average that it takes someone to find a new job after potentially being laid off and stuff like that. I think obviously now it might be a little bit more than that. I think the job market's pretty unstable right now. So I think aiming closer to that 6 month is better. But generally an emergency fund could be for literally anything. Like, for example, getting laid off, having some type of like healthcare issues, like literally anything that is classified
Maybe
as
your car breaking down.
an emergency, I guess. I think obviously you want to be prepared for something like that, and you don't want to obviously go into debt over having an emergency and not having the foresight to plan for something like that. Because the reality is that unfortunately sometimes these things do happen, and you want to be as prepared as possible, because oftentimes when these emergencies happen, you may not be in the right state to try to figure out the finances. So I think they're definitely very, very important.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's just that psychological buffer as well.
Yeah.
Knowing that you can deal with most situations. And obviously, if you're in a career stream where getting a new job is difficult, then you want to go to that 6 months.
For sure.
If you're fairly confident that you can find another job within a short period of time, then I think 3 months is reasonable, and then you can invest the rest. Yeah. All right. Want to pick one then?
Sure. What are good low-risk things to invest in?
Good low-risk things to invest in. So I guess if you're talking about like really low risk, we could talk about GICs, right? I mean, so they're asking about low risk. And would we consider a GIC an investment?
I think it's a baby investment.
I mean, I think if you are planning to spend this money in a short time frame, you need the money, let's say, in the next year, because you never know what's going to happen with the market. You could lose like 30% of your portfolio. And if you really need that money, then, maybe it does make sense to invest in a GIC. I don't invest in GICs, by the way.
Me neither.
So usually the percentage is fairly low.
It's really low. Yeah, I usually average 2 to 5%. And the thing about these, like the name says, guaranteed investment certificate, the thing about these is you have to leave it in there for X amount of years, usually like 2 to 5 years. And then the banks are promising that you get whatever 5% over those 5 years. And I think that's frankly a little bit of a ripoff.
You know, the interesting thing about GICs too is like, at least from what I understand, is compound interest wouldn't work here like in the way that it would for other investments. So yeah, it's a low risk investment.
Very
Let's
low
talk.
risk.
Let's go to the next level then. Let's talk about the stock market, low risk. If you're looking at blue chip companies with dividends, more stable companies that you don't think will go bankrupt. Like, for example, the banks, utility companies, these companies are probably going to stick around. People will always need, electricity, and they pay a dividend. So it's a safe investment. I would say if we're talking about students right now.
Yeah.
And I think students have a unique opportunity to be a little bit more aggressive because they have a larger time horizon and they can make a lot more. So I think unless you needed the money, you have a bucket of money that you will invest for short term, but you need one for long term because I think that's where the real benefit is in terms of investing early. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you got to plan for the future.
Yeah. And if you're primarily worried about not taking too many risks, you're not going to get much reward.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Another one here. What's a good amount to invest that will give results and not break my bank? Well, that's interesting. I think students struggle with how much should I invest in? Is there a rule of thumb you use?
It sort of depends on where you're at. I think my general recommendation would be to first do an analysis of how much money you actually have, how much money is going in, how much money is coming out, and see what amount you're comfortable with potentially losing. So I think I've heard people say I think I'm only comfortable losing $5. Like, what's the point of investing $5?
Yeah.
I think even if you say that to yourself, I don't think that's a very great way to start. But even if you start with $5, it mentally prepares you as to how you can react to that $5 potentially going up or potentially coming down. So to give a more concise answer, I think it just depends on what money you're comfortable losing and if you have any money that you're potentially not spending to try to start investing.
Yeah. I agree with you. I would generally tell people, hey, can you put in $50 a month or $100 a month? Let's say $5 a month. It's pretty small. But I think what would happen is someone would look at that $5. Let's say they'll put another $5 and they'll look at the gains potentially if they do it long enough. And in theory, they would see the percentage increase. And then I think they would do that mental math of what if I put in $1,000?
Yeah.
What would that have meant for me?
Yeah.
So I'd say someone who's saying, what's the point? It's just $10, $20. Just do it and then see. Because I feel like that's almost like a practice account, right?
Yeah, it literally is. Yeah.
Also, people have rules of thumb on percentage of how much of their income they have things that are necessities, luxuries, and then investing. Do you know any rules of thumb?
Yeah, there's the 50, 30, 20.
Yeah.
So 50% for everything that you need, like groceries, utilities, rent, etc. 30 for saving, 20 for investing.
Yeah.
Some people also use that 20 for the fun allowance. But I think as a student, I definitely recommend starting early and start trying to put any money that you can aside to really invest and set yourself up for the future.
All right. Emilia, I think this is a good time for us to go back to some of these interviews that we did on campuses at different universities.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about that for a bit. We decided to go to the major business schools in Ontario and just interview people on common personal finance terms. What was that experience like for you?
It was eye-opening.
It really was.
I was so shocked.
Yeah.
I was so shocked because the acceptances to these schools are so minimal. It's so hard to get into these schools. People from all over the world apply. And we went on campus, interviewed literally the first people that we saw, and they had no idea what a TFSA was. I was shocked.
Okay, I think it just underscores the fact that, even if you're studying business or finance, you may not necessarily know or act upon some of these things, right? So I don't think there's any shame per se in not knowing, but it just a lot of people just don't know, right? So let's dive into the one basic question that a lot of people didn't get was, what is a TFSA?
Okay. Yeah. So a TFSA is a tax-free savings account. It has a bit of a interesting name because it's not actually a savings account that you just put money in and it grows automatically. You actually have to invest the money into some of these things that we talked about, like an ETF or a stock, mutual fund, index fund, etc., for it to actually grow money. So that's sort of like the common misconception about a TFSA.
What age does it start at?
Yeah, so you have to be 18 to open a TFSA, and then the yearly contribution for 2025 is $7,000. If you max that or surpass that $7,000, then you actually do have to pay tax on it. And the whole point of tax-free savings account is that for that $7,000, you make all of the profits from that initial investment without paying any tax on it, which is the beauty of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And we really should be trying to max out all these tax advantaged accounts as much as possible. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate it was called the TFSA, the savings account, because what people thought was like, it's just a normal banking savings account. So people will say, yeah, I have a TFSA, I'm investing. And I guess you're making like a percentage, but it's not really like investing in the market. And I think part of the reason is the way they named it. But yeah, you don't have to just put it into a savings account. You can transfer it you can create a TFSA investing account and invest. Now, the thing is, you're not allowed to day trade
on the TFSA.
on these TFSAs, which means like doing multiple buys and sells during the day. You're going to get dinged for that. The CRA will maybe eventually find out that you're doing this. But yeah, that's why ETFs are I think it's just a perfect type of investment for a TFSA. And then what other people didn't know what DRIP was, right? I mean, I could see that. But I think like when you start investing, you just can't help but get familiar with some of these terms. And if you don't know what a DRIP is, it suggests to me that you've never really done it. Right? What's DRIP?
Yeah, it's dividend reinvestment plan. So pretty much anytime you buy a stock or an ETF, the company rewards you by paying you a dividend, or just fancy way of saying like a dollar amount per month. So sometimes these dividends are small, like $1 a month, like $5 a month. But when you turn on the DRIP on your Wealthsimple TFSA, it actually just reinvests any of those dividends that you make back into the stock of your choice or ETF of your choice.
So you don't have to like initiate the trades on your own. Usually what happens is when people don't turn it on, they just start accumulating cash. And the longer you don't invest it, the more you lose out. Right? So having this technology to invest it automatically is great.
Yeah, for sure.
People didn't know what a MER was.
MER, FHSA. I think there's a lot of things. I guess maybe.
We'll probably get to them. But yeah, I think it was really eye-opening. You know, we don't really expect psychology majors to know about these terms either. But I think part of our mission is trying to increase the financial literacy of people, like especially in psychology, and to like start leveraging their knowledge of psychology to help them become financially independent. All right, let's go into another question.
How to actually take the first step and invest your money? It's a great question.
Yeah. Let's talk about this mutual experience in doing our first trades. So just tell me like what it was like. You talked about your dad. You were too young to have your own account. Once you turned 18, like what happened? Did you like open your own account?
Yeah, so pretty much what happened is all of the money that I sent to my dad, I was actually able to transfer those stocks into my own TFSA. At the time, I had a TD TFSA, and I maxed that out the first year when I turned 18. And then what I actually realized was that TD was charging a $9.99 commission for any time I bought any stock, ETF, anything. And that may not seem like that much money, but if you're making several trades a month, that really adds up. I was losing probably like $40 to $50 a month just paying for that commission just to initiate that trade. And that was honestly one of the stupidest things that I ever did. And I think one of the best decisions that I made for my financial future and my future like money goals was actually transferring to, this is not sponsored, Wealthsimple. Or, you know, I could have transferred to any other platform like Questrade as well. They have commission-free trading. So I could literally trade and save that $50 a month that I was spending on commissions and just put it back into investing.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it reminds me of when I first got into like online banking and realizing like, hey, I don't have to pay like a monthly fee. And you think about investing, like the $9.99, that's pretty standard. But once you start using a platform where you don't have to pay it, you just can't imagine it going back.
Yeah.
You know, it just seems so archaic. But yeah, a lot of people don't know that you can trade for free. Now, that actually can also be a little bit dangerous because
day trading.
Yeah, exactly. If you're investing relatively smaller amounts, paying $9.99, that's like a huge percentage that you're losing right off the bat. Let's talk about these practice accounts. Did you use one of those?
I did, yeah. So that was actually how I first started. Like I said, my teacher sort of explained it as if it was a game. So I had to actually do the digging myself. But I think I would definitely recommend for someone, a student who's starting out, to maybe start out with a friend. Both of you open your own practice account and keep each other accountable, see how you can actually make money, see how it feels to experience potentially making a lot of money or losing money, and just sort of get used to that feeling of unfortunately being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
You know, there's this quote that I love. It's like, growth actually begins when someone is uncomfortable. And I think that by using this practice account, it's having the training wheels on your bike. And then when you actually open your own Wealthsimple account or whatever TFSA account and actually start investing your real money, I think you feel a little bit more prepared, and psychologically you have a blanket and you know how it's actually going to feel in a way. So
I totally agree with you. I think it's kind of like imaginal exposure in psychology.
Exactly.
I had my first practice account with a major bank, $100,000, initiated a trade, and I felt the emotion. Like I could see when it gained and when it lost, like, you know, it still felt kind of real. And then having those experiences helped me gain confidence to actually do my first trade for real. But even then it was like, oh, I'm actually doing this for real. I'm like, do I set a limit order? Do I set a market value order?
Yeah.
And as soon as you initiate the trade, the stock price or the ETF price will change like very soon. You're staring at it and you're like, oh my gosh, I just made a few cents, or I've lost right off the bat. You kind of have to just get used to those feelings.
Yeah.
Right. And also like looking at your portfolio multiple times in a day. Did you ever do that?
Oh, I did. Yeah. I used to check like every hour, and then it eventually became like once a day in the morning. And then I started to get a little bit more comfortable. Yeah.
I mean, the reality is, like, as much as people tell you to like just set it and leave it, you're just naturally curious. But I think like the practice accounts help you kind of get through that a bit. I wouldn't do that for too long, like just get used to it. But I think there's something to be said about just diving in, right?
Just do it.
Just do it.
Rip off the Band-Aid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, let's go for another one here. All right, this one is interesting. TFSA versus RRSP versus FHSA, etc. Compare the types of accounts and what you can invest in. We talked about the TFSA. Let's talk about these other two, RRSP, FHSA. So RRSP, Registered Retirement Savings Plan. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, I know a little bit. So I think you can contribute annually up to, I think it's $8,409, or I think it's 13% of your annual income into that account. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's the tax benefit? So this is another tax sheltered account. So with the TFSA, you're investing money that you've already paid tax on. The RRSP is a bit different, right? When you invest in your RRSP, your taxable income is reduced.
Yeah.
You pay a lot. Usually will get a refund in most cases. So you're not paying tax on these investments until you pull them out in retirement.
Right.
So the general idea is that you're going to be paying you're going to have a lower tax bracket when you're older, you're not working, and so you'll pay less tax. So this is just a great way to invest and shelter from taxes again. FHSA is a new product, and I don't think anyone really knew what this was.
No one knew in the interviews. The first home savings account, I think this is really like such a unique account. I think the limit is actually even higher for a TFSA.
Right.
So for 2025, the contribution is $8,000.
Yeah.
And if you don't invest that $8,000 every year, that's okay. That just carries over. You just have to be sure to check your account on CRA to see your actual contribution limits. I think that's something that is a little bit slept on. You have to actually check your CRA limits, or else you could actually pay tax on that money. But for the FHSA, you can only withdraw that when you actually have proof of buying your first home. And it's like the exact same as a TFSA, but just for buying your first home. So you can invest in, stocks, ETFs, same as you can with the TFSA, but it's just when you actually withdraw the money, that's what's different.
So what aspect of the RRSP applies to the FHSA?
Yeah, so the aspect of actually reducing your taxable income, that's something that's applicable for both the RRSP and the FHSA. However, what makes these two accounts different from your TFSA is that you actually have to withdraw at a certain point. So for the FHSA, you can only withdraw your money once you actually have proof of that you're buying your first home. And same with RRSP, you can only withdraw that money when you actually retire. Whereas your TFSA, you can withdraw at any point and just make sure to not go over that yearly amount.
Yeah, there's different accounts. There's the RESP as well, Registered Education Savings Plan. For financial literacy, it's so important to know what these accounts mean, the rules behind them, and that can help you decide what kinds of investment products you're going to use. So I think it's just really important for people to clarify these terms. And there's like parallels in the United States, like 401ks, Roth IRAs. But yeah, it's so important for us to get a sense of what these terms mean. And I think that's the thing, is like when we interviewed people really didn't really understand or know.
Yeah.
I can kind of understand maybe not knowing things that don't seem as relevant, but I think like the TFSA in particular is something that people should know.
I think like for students specifically, I know like all of these accounts can seem like a lot, but I think this is not financial advice, but focusing on maxing out your TFSA first, and then potentially your FHSA, because the real advantage of the RRSP is that you're lowering your taxable income. But as students, we're not making the peak amount that we can. So there's really not that much incentive for us to actually invest in the RRSP. Whereas for these two other accounts, the TFSA and FHSA, there is.
Right. All right, next question here. How do I do research on stocks? All right, what's your take on that?
I think there's many different ways depending on how advanced you are. I think in business school, they teach a lot of mathematical formulas on how to actually predict or try to predict if the stock is going up or down. But I think it's really hard to actually predict the market. On average, the market has statistically gone up about 12% every year. However, like we said before, stocks are a little bit more riskier investments, but you can definitely invest in stocks that you think are safe. And you can do that through watching the news, tracking like Yahoo Finance, seeing what type of stocks are up and coming, stuff like that.
I used to do research. I used to subscribe to Motley Fool. You ever heard of that?
Yeah, that's very popular. My dad has that.
Oh, does he?
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. I have to be honest with you. It takes a lot of work to
It does.
And research stocks, and to, in particular, knowing which stocks are going to grow. Again, they get it wrong a lot of the time. It feels like it's like tossing a coin, and like the statistics show that people are really poor at predicting things. I remember some of these articles talking so confidently about certain stocks and then going to zero, right? Really interesting. So I personally don't really do a lot of stock picking. I like ETFs. I feel like that's what the evidence says is the tried and true way, but I do have individual stocks. And I think it's okay to take some risks and try and pick stocks, but I don't usually do that with a large portion of my portfolio.
Yeah.
One example where a stock makes sense for me is if there's an index that has like just a few stocks, an ETF, you're paying a management fee and there's no commissions, I think it's just easier to buy. Like, for example, banking stocks. If you want a banking ETF in Canada in particular, there's only like 5 major banks, and you can just easily buy those 5 individually instead of an index. But when you're talking about a sector where there's thousands of companies, then I wouldn't use that strategy. All right, let's go on to another question. This is interesting. Should I own a home or just rent? Well, I think it really depends on the market you're in, and people have studied this, and I've heard the statistical argument that if you rent and invest the difference in the market, you'll probably do better. But I think the reality is that there's something about being a homeowner and not having a landlord and taking pride in your property and like growing up in a place where you have certain memories. The reality is people value that. So even if the math says that you might be better off renting. And those models like have the assumption that people are going to take the difference and invest it as opposed to spend it. And how likely do you think that is?
Not
It's
likely
probably
at all.
unlikely.
Yeah.
Because when we have cash, we'll find a way to spend it. And I
Yeah.
think that's what a mortgage is, like a forced investment vehicle. You have to pay that mortgage, otherwise you're going to lose your house. It just kind of forces you to make that investment. So I think this is one of the things where there's like math and then there's like reality. But the other part of this is that we live in Canada, I live in Toronto, and the market is just
Insane.
right?
Yeah.
So I think people are thinking more and more about living in different places and investing in the Toronto real estate market. You have to have so much capital, and there's a lot of risk with like tenants in Ontario and the laws. A lot of people who live in Ontario, they actually invest in the real estate in the United States.
Yes. Yeah.
Where things are cheaper and they get a better return. So, all right. So let's go to another question here. Oh, this is a good one. Do I need a financial advisor or can I do it myself?
I think you can do it yourself.
You don't have a financial advisor, do you? Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. I talked about this in the beginning, financial advisors. Now, there are good financial advisors, but most financial advisors don't have a ethical obligation to do what's in your best interest. Although some do, there's certain levels of financial advisors where they have a fiduciary to not do things that are like against your interests and more to theirs. But I feel like that's really subjective, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if we're talking in terms of students, I think students are a group that already don't really have that much capital. And I think that if you hire a financial advisor, then you're really not making use of that money that you have set aside as best as you can. Because all of these advisors, like you said before, charge something called MER or management expense fee or management expense ratio as for like ETFs or stocks and stuff like that. But they're pretty much taking a percentage of your profit. Doesn't matter if it goes up or down.
And they usually push products like mutual funds where they make commissions. So it's just a reality. I think they need to make money. They need the commissions. Investing can seem so intimidating to people. They feel they need this expert.
Yeah.
A typical mutual fund salesperson is not someone who's highly trained in terms of finance education. And that's just a reality. So I think you can do it yourself. However, if you are the type of person who will not do this on your own, it is better to invest in using somebody at least. But I think there would be a lot of regret knowing that you could have made way more money if you learned how to do this on your own. I think like as you're getting older, these financial advisors, they don't just work on investments. They should be looking at things like insurance, your will, trusts, incorporating. And they sometimes can have a team, accountants, lawyers, that can help you get these things set up. So I think there's like value in that. Once something like insurance and all that stuff is set up, do you really need them? I guess as you're getting really older, you may need someone to help you manage this stuff if you're not as competent. But I think when it comes to investing, even if you're going to use an advisor, it's important to know what the heck they're doing, right? Yeah. Okay. All right.
What is the difference between saving and investing?
I guess some people think saving is the same as investing. So, I mean, you can save money, but that money is not going to grow unless you invest it in something, right?
Saving is like putting the candy aside,
right?
Putting any candy that you have aside, whereas investing is you're buying more candy and selling more candy, potentially having the ability to make more candy.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. Suddenly I feel like eating Smart Sweets, but okay.
Sponsor us, please.
God. Oh, here's a really interesting one. What's a robo-advisor and should I use one?
Do you want to talk about
Sure.
that? Yeah.
I think I talked about how when we take the human element into investing, it usually mucks things up. So what some of these companies have done is essentially taken the investing decisions out of human hands and created an algorithm. Basically what you do is you select your risk profile, like, very conservative or very aggressive. There's usually like about 5 or 6 different profiles.
Like a Likert scale type
Exactly,
of thing.
yeah. And then frankly, what they will do is they'll have 5 ETFs in a certain proportion, and they'll basically get you to deposit money every month. They'll automatically invest it into these proportions. I think it's a good idea, like as long as the fee is low. But I think the fees are 1%. So it's better than, let's say, the 2% you might get from a human advisor who's probably going to do worse.
Yeah.
1% is still a lot. I know that sounds weird. These fees, like 1%, 2%, 3%, they seem like they're low. If you think about like in a year, let's just say the stock market earned 7%. That 3% is like a huge percentage of that gain, right?
Yeah.
And then you think about the money that's lost from compound interest. So, you think like this is just a tiny percentage to pay for this service, but over time it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars. So I think like reducing your fees is extremely important. Okay, so let's go to the next one.
Should I live with my parents to save money?
Okay. That seems like a really personal question. Like, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I live with my parents.
Yeah. And they're probably listening to this podcast. Yeah.
Well, I think it depends on your personal situation, obviously. I think some people don't have a great relationship with their parents and feel the need to be a little bit more financially independent and stray away from their parents, and that's totally okay. I live with my parents because I am obviously on great terms with them, and I also just live 15 minutes from my university, so it just makes sense for me to commute and invest like pretty much all of my money, which is what I'm doing currently.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it really depends on the person. That's something that's very subjective.
I agree with you. There's something to be said about becoming independent and putting yourself out there. At the same time, with the cost of things, it strategically makes a lot of sense. If you have a home, you can really hustle and invest that money. Again, if it's not a healthy environment you're living in, then it probably makes sense. But if it's a good environment, and eventually the goal is to become independent, then I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. It's a very personal decision. Okay. Are there any downsides to over-contributing to our TFSA?
Yes.
Yeah.
We talked about this. Yeah. You'll just get taxed and probably flagged by the CRA. You don't want that.
Exactly. And I think it's like 1% a month, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What does the potential tariff increase mean for Canadians? What should we look out for when purchasing goods from the U.S.? Okay, so this is the news of the day. The upcoming tariffs are the existing tariffs posed by President Trump. So yeah, right now we're recording this at the end of March. By the time this airs, it looks like some tariffs will be implemented on April the 3rd. There's already increase, I think, in steel.
Yeah,
right?
25% on the dollar. I guess maybe we can talk about what is a tariff.
So a tariff is like a duty or a fee. It's paid by actually the importer for goods that are coming from another country. So typically that cost is transferred to the consumer. Typically what happens may not be the exact percentage. And the manufacturer of the product may decide to lower the price to mitigate this because they want their product to be sold. But it's a fee that's paid by the importer, essentially. Yeah. This whole thing has brought Canadians of different political perspectives together, and people are trying to, I think, buy Canadian more. I read that the number of people traveling to the United States has decreased.
I've seen companies who have totally bailed on their conferences in the States and refused to go as a protest. I think if we just break down like what it means economically, like economics 101. So in this case, they're imposing the tariffs on Canadian goods, the US. So anything that's exported from Canada, so moved from Canada to the US, the Americans will have to pay 25 cents on the dollar or 25% tariffs onto our goods. So what does that mean? So they're probably not going to want to buy Canadian because it's more expensive for them. Yep. So what does that do to us? That brings our demand down, making like people don't want to buy from us anymore. So how are we going to make money? That's going to affect the Canadian economy very badly because we're not going to be able to make as much money as we could because people are not going to want to buy from, the Americans are not going to want to buy our products.
And there's millions and millions of cars in the United States that are not produced there. And in Ontario, auto sector is like huge, right?
Yeah.
Energy sector is huge, obviously, in the West, in Alberta. unfortunately will have an effect. And I think the stock market is like reflecting that, right?
Yeah, it's super down right now. And I think Windsor, where I'm at, I was actually born in Windsor. That's the largest like automobile sort of area in Ontario. And I know that all of the people from Windsor are very upset right now. And there's so many factories when you go over to Windsor for cars and stuff like that. Also for lumber and wood as well is another really big hit for Canadians. That's how we make a lot of our money. And they also imposed the tariffs on lumber and wood as well. So many industries affected by this. And that's clearly shown in the stock market.
Yeah. So I guess if we tie it back to investing, which is the purpose of the podcast, would this change your investing strategy or would it not? Are you going to just continue to do what you're doing from an investing point of view?
Well, I think something that I follow, like as a rule of thumb, is usually when the market's down or very unpredictable, like it is right now. We see in the news is Trump one day is imposing the tariff, sometimes he's not. A lot of indecisiveness going on, everything's up in the air. I think something that I'm starting to do and more is invest in gold.
Okay.
I think that's something that's been statistically proven to do really, really well in times of economic scrutiny. So that's what I'm doing right now.
That's interesting, yeah.
I know a lot of Canadians are in solidarity of being Canadian are starting to promote more Canadian brands and not really buying products from the States.
Yeah.
So I think I'm definitely going to try to implement that a little bit as well. So
yeah, I think there could be opportunities for people to change their strategy. Yeah. There's volatility indexes. The more volatile the market is, there's ways to profit from that.
Yeah, for sure.
My perspective for me personally, is to just continue what I'm doing and not change. Because I think that's part of the trap of things is that the markets are already very super efficient. And if I'm trying to game things or like predict things, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to do that as effectively. I don't know if you've heard of this term, things are already priced into the market.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, like you said, with gold and things like that, there are opportunities to be strategic. I think like for me, sticking with my strategy and just being consistent with it has worked.
Yeah.
The thing with some of these strategies too is you also have to know when to exit them, right?
Yeah.
And so that can be very tricky. But yeah, okay. So let's go on to the next question. So what is compound interest and how does it actually work? You ever heard of the eighth wonder of the world being compound interest? That was like Albert Einstein. I don't know if that's a myth. Let's talk about why compound interest is so amazing. So it's essentially you are not only making money on your principal, you're making it on the interest that you've earned. So you're making interest on interest.
Yeah.
And that can just have an exponential impact on your investment timeline.
Yeah, I think just touching back to the whole student aspect, I think something that is very, very beneficial with compound interest is actually time.
Right.
So I think the longer amount of time that you keep that money in there, the more compound interest it will grow. So as students, when we're young, 18, 19, then we're at the biggest advantage that we can possibly have versus someone who's starting at 30, and that advantage is time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Your $1 could be something like $77 in the future, whereas someone who's like 40, it could be like $5 or something like that. Yeah. All right. Should I pay off debt first or start investing? I think this is a great question. I guess the reality is like a lot of people finish school in debt. I think it really depends on the kind of debt you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? There's credit card debt, which is
high interest.
One of the worst things you can get into. Like 22% or something like that.
Yeah, it really depends on the card, but
but that's a ballpark, right?
Yeah.
And we just talked about compound interest. It works the other way around too. You're paying debt upon the interest on debt. So I'd say if you've got any credit card debt, you got to pay that off first for 100%, right?
Right away.
But let's just say we're talking about student loan debt, which might be at a lower percentage. What's your take? Do you think someone should just pay that off, get it to zero, and then from zero, like no debt, and now start investing?
I think you should try to start investing as you're tackling that debt as well. But I think still having the priority of paying off that debt, but just getting in the habit of still investing and living below your means and setting that money aside to really start, preparing for the future a little bit after you pay off that debt, because you don't want to be totally rinsed after you pay off that debt. You still want to have your emergency fund, your investments, just to carry you forward with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you're talking about low interest debt, I think it makes sense to hedge your bets. And also we talked about practicing investing. So if you're going to wait till you're in your 30s to start investing, you're just not going to have that experience.
Yeah.
I think doing both makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're on to this really interesting question here. What's FIRE?
Financial independence, retire early.
And is it realistic?
I mean, yeah, I think it's realistic. Yeah. Do you want to talk about your experience in the FIRE community?
I became adherent of the FIRE movement several years ago. It's just a cute acronym, FIRE. And to be honest with you, I did have a goal of retiring early. I just thought it was a really cool thing to do. There's actually this guy, Mr. Money Mustache.
Okay.
He's a Canadian engineer, lived in the States. He kind of front-loaded a lot of his work, investing, like making money, investing a significant proportion of it, and then deciding to retire early.
Yep.
And I think living a more humble life with purpose and meaning. He had this blog and just exploded. And a lot of people started to latch onto this idea. There's like a Canadian young couple that also happen to be engineers. I think they became the youngest retirees in the country.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
they have a website called Millennial Revolution. And I saw them on YouTube, like I think a CBC interview.
Yeah.
And they were really inspiring. So they have a whole series on investing as well. So I became financially independent pretty early, and I dabbled in retiring, like I did a partial retirement. I think I quickly realized that work is actually really important for your well-being, and having a sense of purpose through your work. The ironic thing is a lot of these people who achieve FIRE, they end up like their whole purpose is to try and teach this to others, and they actually start working on that. So it's not like they're sipping margaritas on the beach. I don't think anyone really enjoys doing that after a month or so. The financial independence part, I think, is the thing that people really latch onto. And the retirement is like more like retire optional. The ability to retire if you want to, and the ability to say no to something because it's not serving you, I think is like a real luxury. And I think that's what people are trying to attain.
Yeah. I guess maybe we should talk about what is financial independence.
Yeah, so financial independence, I guess there's different definitions. I guess the mathematical definition is having your passive income, being able to pay for your expenses. And I think that's why if you can keep your expenses reasonable, then you have much more power to reach financial independence earlier.
Right.
Yeah, and the thing is though, like the stock market can go up and down.
Yeah.
So even if you hit that moment, like it might change the next day or the next month. So you also have to, I think, have a buffer. But yeah, I think it's very powerful though when you realize that you're making money in your sleep and that money can pay for your expenses, let's just say 2 times over. I think that's like a really great place to be. And as long as you don't inflate your lifestyle too much, then you're gold, right? I think the psychological definition is something important, which is freedom. Like that's the whole point. It's not being rich or saying you have X amount of dollars. It's the ability to be free and to make choices and to live out your life the way you want to. I think that's what financial independence really is. Yeah.
So inspirational.
Okay. All right.
Okay, next. Okay. What are beginner mistakes that we should look out for? Falling into the commission trap, like I did.
The commission, the 995 commission, the advisor, like for me, hiring the advisor that kind of woos you and you just fall for it without doing your research.
The TikTok investors. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Yeah, there's so many
Tell me about
people
that.
on TikTok and on YouTube, like the YouTube Shorts, whatever, Instagram Reels, all of these people trying to sell you their courses and sell you things that are similar to the Motley Fool.
Right.
Like all of these investment. You should invest in this. You should buy my course, do all of this. And the reality is that a lot of these people are actually scammers.
Right.
So I think that's something that you should look out for and be very conscious and aware of where you're getting your financial information from, what media source, make sure it's trusted, credible.
I think like one interesting thing in my experience with my friends and family is realizing how many reasons people have to not take action, essentially. I think really considering these things as excuses.
Yeah.
Right? It's I don't have time. I don't have enough money. It's too complicated. I'll do it when X, Y, Z. I think if you're not doing it, you really have to examine the reason why, and you got to just push through it. But I can't tell you how many people like delay it and procrastinate. Once you kind of take that dive and once you see the benefit of it, you just think, I should have started this earlier. So I think like for me it would be not starting early enough. I'm amazed that you started when you did. Honestly, it's amazing. I have tried to teach my daughter about investing early. I did what your dad did too. I set up an account for her, tried to talk to her about things she was interested in. She wanted to invest in like Roblox, but now she's like really into tech. So she wants to invest in tech companies. She really wanted to invest in Microsoft as the AI stuff came out. So if she has an idea like that, I want to encourage it. And once I can transfer that to her, then she can manage it herself. What I've learned too is like with people that I know with their RRSPs, that's huge. That's like your child's education. And unfortunately, people don't start early enough. They don't invest regularly. They're not getting the free money from the government.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they've unfortunately hired these companies that take off so much of the money through commissions. These trusts, like RRSP trusts.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're one of the biggest scams out there. I guess maybe scams is a harsh word, but you're not making as much that you potentially could if you self-directed. Okay, let's talk about this one. Should I lease a car, buy new, or buy used?
From a student point of view, cars are definitely not an asset. They depreciate a lot. They lose a lot of value over time. I think as a student, a car comes with so many different expenses, paying for your insurance, paying for gas, or if you have an electric car, that's great. But gas is something that's really expensive, and you never know what could happen. Having an emergency fund for your car as well that you are constantly putting money into, any parking tickets, anything like that. Cars can be very, very expensive. So I think adding a lease payment on top of that would be something that would be very, very a bad move for students. I would honestly recommend just buying like a cheap car that gets you from point A to B safely so that you don't have to put any more money into something that's already depreciating.
I think that's a really sensible perspective. And I think like the sweet spot for getting a used car is something like 3 to 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Most of the depreciation has occurred. And a lot of vehicles these days are built quite well. So you just have to be really careful. I think if you get these pre-purchase inspections, I got mine for free from one of the vehicles that I have that I basically bought it for, I think around $7,000. Luckily for me, this place that specializes in the brand that I bought, this mechanic, they just did it for free. It's amazing. The first vehicle I got, like I was considering, was a complete lemon, and they told me there's no way I can buy it.
Yeah.
And I would have had no idea. So I guess that's the risk of buying used.
Yeah.
Right? You got to make sure that it's a reliable vehicle, but you can save so much money in the long term by going this route. I will say one of the things that I think people feel is a symbol of making it is like the vehicle that they drive, right? So it's just a really hard temptation.
Yeah.
And then when you have a vehicle that's breaking down, it's easy to think, if I just buy brand new, I don't have to deal with this. So there's a lot of rationalization that can go on. But I think psychologically, being able to resist the notion that you're going to be judged by the vehicle that you drive is really hard. Now, obviously, if you really love whatever, a certain kind of vehicle, and you can afford it and you can pay for it in cash, that's one thing. But if you're making a decision between going into debt, not investing, and instead driving a high-end vehicle.
Yeah.
I think that's reflects a deeper issue that you might have to deal with. Okay. We're almost there. Is it smart to take out a loan to invest? Wow, this is a really interesting question. So investing on leverage, I could never, if you do that and you're lucky, then good for you, but it's extremely risky to do that.
I would not.
Yeah, I would not do that.
Yeah.
I would only invest with money you have that you've earned. What stocks, ETFs should we invest in? So again, we're not financial advisors, but I think a lot of people just want to know. They want some transparency. They want to know what people invest in. There's like a social media platform called Blossom. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
Blossom.
Yep.
Like the idea is that people share their investment strategies and you can see their portfolios online, right? I think that's actually an amazing kind of thing. And I think they kind of promote this whole ETF investing philosophy. So you're not getting these hot stock tips or like crypto tips. Let's talk about the ETFs that we would recommend.
I guess for tickers, we could just list the tickers. VO, VSP, ZSP, QQQ, SPY. Those are all ETFs. I guess for some stocks that I think have had a very good statistical performance, like looking back, probably Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA.
Of course, yeah. If you're investing in ZQQ or QQQ, the NASDAQ, you are getting a piece of these huge companies, NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, you're automatically getting that. And these indexes are weighted by the market cap of the companies. So, you're going to get a higher proportion of these companies. The thing is, who knows who the top 5 companies will be in a decade from now? It may be completely different. It may be the same. But the beauty of the ETFs is that they account for that. So you're already buying the winners, right? You don't have to worry about the buying and selling. It's already happening on your behalf, right? I love Vanguard because the MERs are super low.
Yeah.
There's a company called Horizons that have very cheap ETFs. If I'm investing in the Canadian stock market, I invest in something called HXT. That's the Canadian market. There's HGRO, that's Vanguard equivalent, which would be probably VGRO. So these are kind of like balanced growth stocks.
Yeah.
VEQT is Vanguard, and it's all equity, so it's all stocks. And I have money in USD. So VTI has been the main ETF I've used, and I believe that one is like over 10,000 companies.
Yeah.
The management fee is so tiny, and it's done amazing. So
that's awesome.
There's just a few. I don't think you have to have like 10, 20, 30, 40 ETFs. There's these things called all-in-one ETFs or target ETFs where you can set a target date, like a retirement date, and it does that whole rebalancing for you over time. The one thing I would say about those like more fancier ETFs though is like the management fees tend to get jumped higher.
Yeah.
And again, there's no reason why you can't do that part yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How do I know when to sell a stock? That is such an interesting question. I don't think you can know. For example, let's talk about Amazon. If you bought Amazon at 8 cents and it quadrupled, should you sell it?
You could never know for sure. If you look back to the 1990s when Amazon first came on the market, you can see that it's so cheap. It literally started at like around 8 cents.
Right.
Now it's at a couple $100s. So if you sold in the early 2000s, you lost out on so much money, but you could have never known that it would have went up so much. So it's hard to tell with stocks, I think. But if you're losing a lot of money and you're getting really uncomfortable with the amount that you're potentially losing, I think psychologically that might help you sell or justify selling, but the reality is you can never know for sure.
And I think this kind of harkens back to the index fund strategy is like when you invest in the index, you don't have to worry about this question, right? You don't have to know when to sell. It's irrelevant. The index is doing this on your behalf. You only need to know when to sell when you need the money.
Yeah.
But I guess like maybe generally speaking, I would say try to resist selling out of panic when it's going down.
Yeah.
If you believe it's going to eventually go up,
keep it. Yeah.
Okay. What is a mutual fund?
Did we answer that?
I don't think we really answered. I think we just patched mutual funds. Okay, so a mutual fund, it's different from the ETF. It's not sold on the open market. Usually you just buy and sell once a day, and there's a manager.
From your bank?
Could be the bank.
Yeah.
It could be from another institution, but they have a prospectus. They talk about like how great they are. So there's a human being or a team that is managing this money, buying, selling, and they're trying to like sell you their knowledge. And because there's this team of people, there's a management fee, and the management fee tends to be pretty high.
Yep.
They'll try and market it by saying, "Oh, look at the performance that we've had. It's beaten the market." You got to understand that they often slice and dice the data for a sales point of view. And the fact is that even when people do beat the market, they can't do it consistently. The real losers end up not even selling the products anymore. So you don't really get a full scope of how poorly people do. But anyway, mutual funds, I would say, is what people like maybe in my generation are more familiar with and are just accustomed to using.
Yeah.
But essentially, if they're tracking the same things that a ETF does, you're better off with the ETF.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, you want to read the last two?
Sure. How would you know what your total TFSA contribution room is so that you don't exceed it?
The CRA, when you log into your CRA account, they'll have an amount, but it's not always accurate.
Updated.
I don't know, have you felt like I've seen it and it's like, that's not true. I guess they'd have to get the data from your bank with the withdrawals, et cetera. You are responsible ultimately for tracking this on your own.
I think CRA gives like a decent ballpark, but I think obviously if you're buying, selling a little bit more frequently than just a couple of times a year, then it's definitely not the most reliable.
So, Emilia, we've gone through all these questions. I guess let's talk about some parting advice we'd have for people who are really interested in investing. What would that be?
I think definitely if you're just starting out, try to figure out what amount you're comfortable with losing and try to go from there and take the first steps to actually investing. I think before you invest like your own money, try to set up an account like Webull and Questrade where it's the fake money, like whatever, the $100,000, and see how you actually emotionally react to potentially making a lot of money or losing a lot of money. And then when you feel comfortable, you can, like I said before, take those training wheels off and start investing your actual money. And I definitely recommend like potentially starting with a partner to keep you accountable, be a little bit transparent amongst yourselves and amongst each other, just for that accountability aspect. But definitely just get started, I think, is the key.
Yeah.
Don't try to do all these fancy things and overcomplicate it. I think the beauty of it is just to get started.
Yeah. I agree. It's actually really easy to get educated on these things. I think what we can do is give a list of resources on our site related to this episode, some reliable books that we recommend or websites. I think one of the takeaways is that anyone can do this. Both Emilia and I were not trained in finance. We don't have finance degrees, but I think we've been successful so far in navigating this, and not necessarily needing a financial advisor. You can use a financial advisor, but it's still important to know what the heck they're doing.
Yeah.
I guess one of the takeaways is that I think anyone can learn this. Not everyone does. Not everyone has the motivation. So hopefully through this podcast, you've been inspired to take the first steps.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel nervous and anxious about it, but once you start doing it, you'll realize how easy it is. Once you start doing your first few trades, you'll realize, that wasn't so bad. And now I just have to sit and wait, and I can increase my contributions every month. And it's fun to look at it and talk about it, as opposed to having no clue what people are talking about. I think would be my takeaway. And again, just go for it and do it.
Cool. Okay.
Cool. All right. What can our audience expect next in terms of this podcast related to these topics?
Yeah, I think we're planning on starting a series where we talk about financial psychology and break down some more of these concepts and ETF stocks and some of the actual psychology behind investing even more. Yeah. Our next episode after this will be with Dr. Moira Summers, who's actually a wealth psychologist, and she's into family planning and succession planning surrounding the area of financial psychology.
We're super excited to have Dr. Summers on the podcast. She actually inspired me to attend the Financial Therapy Association conference. She was the keynote speaker there. I actually had no idea when I reached out to her that she was going to do that. And we're going to attend the conference again this year. And we're planning to have other amazing speakers on our podcast. And so, yeah, I think I'm really excited to dive deeper into some of these topics. We just touched on a bunch of them. It's just exciting to see what's ahead.
Yeah.
All right. With that, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Enriched Mindset Podcast.
Bye.
Bye.